Awesome. So we are recording. This will be sent out after as well, like I mentioned. So welcome. This is our fourth webinar in this winter series. We are so excited for this one. I just want to first acknowledge that Meewasin is on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis, and we are also very thankful for the Grandy Family Foundation for all the support that they give the Friends of the Valley program. So a little bit about Bronwen before we launch into her webinar. Bronwen is a resource management technician at Meewasin with 8 years of experience in the environmental fields, primarily in field botany. She lives in a far north of Saskatoon with her partner and all of their many critters. So we are very excited to learn about exotic plants, what is the different similarities between exotic plants and listed weed species, and how they impact the natural areas. So Bronwyn, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. I will start sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see it.
You're good to go.
Perfect. All right, welcome. My name is Bronwen Plumer, and I'm a resource management technician with the Meewasin Valley Authority. Today, I'm going to discuss exotic plants and how they impact natural areas, particularly throughout the Meewasin River Valley. I'll go over what an exotic plant is, exotic plants and listed weed species, where there's crossover between these designations and some differences, how they impact natural areas, examples of exotic plants found in the Meewasin Valley, and what Meewasin is doing to manage exotic plants in the river valley. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that all of the work that we do at Meewasin is on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis. As part of our efforts towards reconciliation, we want to honor the vast knowledge held by the traditional caretakers of the land as we steward it today. Meewasin is a regional conservation authority that manages several natural sites and an extensive network of trails throughout the city of Saskatoon and surrounding area. The name Meewasin is a Cree word that means it is beautiful. We have a three-part mandate to conserve, develop, and educate. This is to ensure that the river valley stays healthy and vibrant while balancing human use and conservation for present and future generations. It is the largest urban conservation zone in Canada, comprising of approximately 6,700 hectares, and has over 107 kilometers of trail in and around the city of Saskatoon and into the RM of Corman Park. We strive to enhance biodiversity, restore and conserve these unique landscapes while simultaneously promoting year-round accessibility through public programming, interpretation, and the maintenance of public sites and trails. As Saskatoon grows, our sites and trails see more and more use. With an area so large within a largely urban area, you can see how exotic plant species present a significant conservation and restoration challenge for us. So I'll start by going over what an exotic plant is. Exotic plants are species that have been introduced to regions outside of their native habitat. Two categories they can fall into are non-invasive / ornamental. These are plants introduced for their beauty that stay in the garden. An example of this would be lilacs or bleeding hearts. Invasive or naturalized exotic species are plants that spread aggressively, alter habitats, and push out native species. An example of this is purple loosestrife, which is pictured here. The term naturalized can cause some confusion, though, as it can be misinterpreted as not problematic, when in actuality it refers to when an exotic plant manages to reproduce in abundance naturally in its new environment. For instance, alfalfa, goat's beard, sweet clover, German iris, Kentucky bluegrass, and smooth brome, and many listed weed species are considered naturalized because they reproduce here in abundance, whereas plants like lilacs, bleeding hearts, and rhubarb are not because they do not reproduce on their own. This means if you come across a lilac or a rhubarb deep in the woods or seemingly in the middle of nowhere on the prairie, you can assume that the site was inhabited at one point. Lilacs and rhubarb survive long after people are gone, but cannot spread very far. They remain confined to the place where they are planted, so they are not considered naturalized. Many exotic plants are also considered invasive. and have legal documentation. Saskatchewan regulates weeds under the Weed Control Act, categorizing them as prohibited, noxious, or nuisance based on their prevalence and potential for damage. The Act, updated as of July 2025, mandates that landowners manage these species to prevent further spread. Prohibited weeds are rare or not present in the province and must be reported. Examples include Dalmatian toadflax and spotted knotweed and flowering rush, which is pictured here. Noxious weeds are established, aka naturalized, and they require control to prevent further spread. Examples include yellow toadflax, baby's breath, creeping bellflower, leafy spurge, and European buckthorn. Nuisance weeds are widespread, again, aka naturalized, and need management if they negatively affect land use. Examples include dandelion, Canada thistle, and quackgrass. However, not all exotics are legally regulated, which I'll discuss a bit later. So there are a number of ways you can report listed weed species, including online platforms like IMAP Invasives to submit reports with photos and location data, report directly to Saskatchewan Invasive Species Council via their website. For serious or new threats, you should call the Provincial Ministry of Agriculture directly, and you can contact your local RM office to report to the local weed inspector who handles enforcement under the Weed Control Act. Exotic plants, particularly those classified as invasive, significantly alter natural areas by outcompeting native species, disrupting ecosystem functions and reducing biodiversity. They often thrive because they leave behind their natural predators, allowing them to spread rapidly and form dense, often monoculture stands. General ecological and environmental impacts of exotic species include biodiversity loss. Exotic plants displace native vegetation, reducing the variety of plant life. This affects the entire food web as many native insects, birds, and animals rely on specific native plants for their food or habitat. They can alter ecosystem processes. They can change natural cycles, such as speeding up fire cycles, altering nutrient cycling, and changing soil chemistry. They can negatively influence resource competition. Exotic species can aggressively consume water, nutrients, sunlight, and often at a higher rate than native species. They can exacerbate soil degradation and erosion. Many invasives alter soil conditions, leading to increased erosion and reduced soil quality. Some have allelopathic effects. Some invasive plants like garlic mustard, a listed prohibited weed, release chemical substances into the soil that inhibit the growth of the surrounding native plants. They can disrupt specific ecosystems, as in forests. Invasive trees and shrubs like European buckthorn can dominate the understory, preventing native tree regeneration and reducing forest health. In wetlands, species like purple loosestrife and flowering rush can completely take over wetland habitats, choking out native vegetation. And in grasslands, invasive plants can quickly turn diverse native prairies into monotonous patches of a single species, like the baby's breath pictured here, or grass species like smooth brome or Kentucky bluegrass. Exotic plants can have economic and social impacts too. Controlling invasive plants requires immense ongoing financial investment for manual, chemical, or biological control. They can contribute to the loss of ecosystem services, which means the degradation of natural areas reduces their ability to provide clean air, water, and erosion control. And they can impact recreation. Invasive plants can clog waterways, making boating or fishing impossible and making trails inaccessible. They can also make areas less visually interesting if they form a monoculture stand. And they can impact agriculture. Leafy spurge, yellow and Dalmatian toadflax are toxic to cattle, and large monoculture stands of these plants and other unpalatable exotic species reduce grazing capacity for ranchers. So with those impacts in mind, you can imagine how an organization like Meewasin is challenged with exotic species on many of our sites. With 6,700 hectares of land within our jurisdiction, We share borders with residential, commercial, agricultural, and industrial areas. I had mentioned earlier that not all exotic species are legally regulated. These areas that share borders with the Meewasin Valley often use exotic species for landscaping, crop and forage, and land stabilization. Common examples of exotic plants that we find in the Meewasin Valley are trees and shrubs like lilacs, caragana, Scots pine, Siberian elm, gardening and landscaping species like Kentucky bluegrass, bouncing bet, Candle larkspur, and Kankakee mallow. I don't know if I said that right, but agricultural species like smooth brome, crested wheatgrass, sweet clover, and alfalfa, as well as listed invasive species like purple loosestrife, creeping bellflower, nodding thistle, baby's breath, and European buckthorn. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, and not all of these exotics are legally regulated, but can negatively impact natural areas if left unmanaged, despite not being listed under the Weed Control Act. I'll go over some specific examples of exotic plant species we have found or we find in the valley that are not listed weed species, so you may not think of them when you think of problematic plants in the valley. So a first example is Scots or Scotch pine. It is a popular landscaping tree used here in Canada, but it is native to Europe and Asia. The Scots pine is the most widely distributed pine tree in the world and was introduced to North America as early as 1600. It was distributed by the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration as a shelter belt tree for farmyards, as it is very hardy and suited to the prairies. It is now considered invasive in Ontario, but not here in Saskatchewan, according to the Weed Control Act. However, it can spread via seed and establish itself very easily. This can be problematic as it alters habitats, introducing trees to prairie habitats, and impacts forest habitats by pushing out native trees and understory species. Stands of these trees have been found at Crocus Prairie and Chief Whitecap Park. This past winter, Meewasin hosted a volunteer event where folks were able to go to Crocus Prairie and cut a Scots pine Christmas tree for themselves. And this helped us manage woody encroachment and exotic species. You can see in these pictures here by a fellow resource management technician, Abby. The second example is Candle larkspur. Candle larkspur are tall, striking perennials popular in Saskatchewan gardens as ornamental species. All parts of this plant are highly toxic to humans, dogs, cats, and horses. Their seeds are the most poisonous part of the plant, and eating only a handful of these seeds is potentially fatal. Interestingly, these plants were used by soldiers in the Civil War to kill body lice, though. They are a favorite of bees, butterflies, hummingbirds, and florists. They germinate easily and will self-seed, but resent disturbance and are not commonly found outside of their garden origins. So this could be why they are not considered a listed weed species currently. But the fact that they do germinate easily and their toxicity can make them problematic in public natural spaces. I have seen this plant at Maple Grove site, which makes sense with its history as a former residential area where folks were gardening and planting ornamentals for their beauty. However, this plant does have the potential to become an invasive exotic, but for now, it's just considered an ornamental species. Another example is smooth brome. Smooth brome was introduced to Western Canada in 1896 from Eurasia, from an environment similar to that of the fescue prairie in central Saskatchewan. After 1900, smooth brome was used for hay and pasture. This grass creates monoculture stands and suppresses the growth of other species to the point where native species become non-existent in these areas. The impact of monoculture stands such as this goes beyond reducing plant diversity, but also reducing bird and insect diversity. I had mentioned earlier that exotic invasive plants can have allelopathic effects. Allelopathy is a biological phenomenon by which an organism produces one or more biochemicals that influence germination, growth, survival, and reproduction of other organisms. Smooth brome employs both allelopathic mechanisms and intense resource competition to exclude native vegetation, including smooth brome roots release substances that directly inhibit the growth of surrounding plant species. It thrives in nitrogen-enriched soils and accelerates the nitrogen cycle. Its leaf litter decomposes faster than native species, thereby altering the soil biochemistry in its favor. It spreads through underground stems called rhizomes, creating dense patches. Smooth brome starts growing earlier in the spring than native species, allowing it to monopolize available water and nutrients. And you can see this all over the valley. It's pretty much ubiquitous here in the prairies. Another example is sweet clover. It's native to Asia, and in the 1700s, it was introduced to North America, and interestingly considered a weed for about 200 years. But since 1875, it was recognized as a valuable forage crop. But it also has risk to livestock if they overeat this species, as they may develop what is called bleeding disease. It is a fast-growing legume that is valuable for soil improvement, silage production, and nutritious forage. It is also a source of nectar and pollen for honey production. It is drought-resistant and particularly well adapted to the drier areas of Western Canada. It is considered a naturalized exotic, and it is not listed as an invasive species to be regulated. However, it is incredibly challenging to manage because of the seed bank size and years of viability. It is a biennial plant, that is, it lives through only one winter. However, it can produce around 100,000 seeds per plant, and the seeds can remain dormant for upwards of 40 years and still be viable. Because of its biennial nature, where there are big flushes of sweet clover one year and minimal the next, there is some debate whether or not it should be considered an invasive weed. If you were out at Beaver Creek last year, you may have noticed that Restoration Field north of the road and Interpretive Center had a big flush of yellow and white sweet clover, but this coming year, it may seem like it never existed at all. And then Caragana. Caragana is originally from Siberia. It was introduced to Saskatchewan in the early 20th century, becoming a cornerstone of prairie agriculture as a hardy, drought-resistant shelter belt shrub. It was crucial for soil erosion protection and defining homestead boundaries, particularly during the Depression. It was heavily used by the Prairie Farm Rehabilitation Administration for windbreaks, erosion control, and because it is a nitrogen fixer, so that it improves the soil. It is known to survive for 80 to 140 years, often outliving the farmhouses they were planted to protect, becoming emblematic of the rural prairies. Now it is widely considered an emerging invasive species in Saskatchewan and the Canadian prairies. It is now recognized for its ability to spread into natural habitats such as aspen forests and grasslands, where it outcompetes native vegetation. It produces copious amounts of seed, thereby changing the ecology of natural areas. Caragana is found at various sites in the valley and is difficult to eradicate. Simply cutting it back often leads to intense resprouting and requires a long-term, consistent commitment to removal efforts, upwards of 10 years or so. So what is Meewasin doing about these exotics? The Meewasin resource management and horticulture teams work hard to manage invasive species in our jurisdiction in a variety of ways. We employ manual, mechanical, chemical, and biocontrol methods. We hand pull and dig up some species. We also use herbicide, mowing, grazing, and prescribed fire to help control the spread of certain species. Meewasin has cut down large swaths of European buckthorn, pulled purple loosestrife, released flea beetles to manage leafy spurge, sheep grazing for sweet clover and shrub encroachment, employed prescribed fire to mitigate the spread of Kentucky bluegrass and smooth brome, and herbicide for particularly tough species like absinthe wormwood and kochia. And we can't talk about invasive species removal in the Meewasin Valley without talking about our dedicated volunteers. For example, they help chop the heads off nodding thistle, dig up baby's breath, and cut down European buckthorn with us. In 2025, Meewasin accumulated 270 hours of volunteer work specifically in exotic invasive species removal. Volunteers are an essential part of Meewasin, and much of the work that we do simply couldn't happen without their support. So to wrap up, come volunteer with Meewasin. Our program is called Friends of the Meewasin Valley. Friends of the Meewasin Valley Volunteer Program. Check out our website to sign up. You will get to work with Katie, our wonderful volunteer coordinator, who introduced me at the beginning of this webinar and coordinates all of these webinars as well. So a big thank you to Katie, and go sign up for the newsletter and volunteer. Thanks for joining this webinar. I hope you learned something new, and I hope I've inspired you to come help us manage exotic invasive species in the Valley.
So sorry, team. Thank you so much, Bronwen. That was so awesome. We learned so much about some of the exotic plants that we have in the Meewasin Valley. If there's any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll leave it open for a couple minutes. But if there isn't any questions, or if you don't feel comfortable asking a question in the chat, feel free to send me an email when I send out the recording, and then I can pass it along to Bronwen and get that answer back to you. I don't see any questions. So again, thank you so much for coming out this afternoon during the lunch hour. I appreciate it so much. Our next webinar is actually early April. More information to follow for that one as well. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Oh, Eric has a question. So we do have one question. Eric has a question. How do you feel about lesser burdock, Bronwen?
Lesser burdock. Oh yeah. Yeah. It's not a fun one, but at least it's also a biennial. So maybe Eric and I can get a handle on that this coming year.
Awesome.